Hey, Skills Champions. It's Rachel Unruh at National Skills Coalition here with Katie Spiker. We're back with Skills on the Hill, and there's a lot going on in DC. We've got appropriations, we've got the debt ceiling, we've got human infrastructure bill moving, or Build Back Better as it's more commonly known, and then we've got hard infrastructure, the Infrastructure Investment and American Jobs Act. And while each of these is in some ways its own vehicle, they're really all inextricably linked. So Katie, why don't we walk through each of these with a little update on where they are and how they're connected to each other. So first, let's tackle appropriations. What's happening with that?
The fiscal year ends tomorrow at midnight, which means Congress needs to pass something that either continues funding for programs that rely on those investments or pass a spending deal. They're not going to pass a spending deal for the next year in that time, but they're likely to come to an agreement on a continuing resolution that that keeps all those funding levels even, probably until sometime in December.
Got it. Okay, so then let's talk about the next thing, which is the debt ceiling. And that's inextricably linked to Build Back Better, the human infrastructure bill. That, as you've shared with us on previous episodes, the House version has $54 billion for America's College Promise and $80 billion in workforce investments, and a lot of other investments in important support services. So why is the fate of Build Back Better now tied to what happens with the debt ceiling?
So just this week, Treasury came out and announced that the debt ceiling would be reached October 18th, which means that at that point, the government won't be able to borrow any additional money or pay off the debts for the money that's borrowed. This is a procedural conversation that happens every few years, and Congress has to either raise the debt ceiling, raising the limit of the amount of money that the United States can borrow, or suspend it for a certain amount of time. The Republicans, particularly in the Senate, so Minority Leader McConnell, have come out and said that the Democrats are in the majority. It's their responsibility to raise the debt limit. Or to address the debt limit. The only way for Democrats to do that without Republican support is through something like the reconciliation process that they're using to pass Build Back Better. And because of the restrictions in the reconciliation process, that means that Democrats are going to have to vote to raise the debt limit to a certain number and do so by October 18th. If they choose to link Build Back Better in the reconciliation process with that debt ceiling limit that is coming October 18th. That means that they now have a new potential timeline or a new potential deadline for passing Build Back Better if it needs to have this provision on the debt ceiling as part of it. But negotiations around the proposals that you described, America's College Promise, the broader workforce investment, some of the community college partnership pieces, those are kind of on pause or in limbo right now as the committees who are deciding what programs are going to be included and at what levels are waiting for the new top line that each allocation will have and that the bill overall will have. That's a discussion that's happening right now between moderates, Democrat moderates on the Dem side, and leadership as they're negotiating what's a top level for the overall package that someone like Senator Manchin feels comfortable being able to sell back in West Virginia. And so until that decision is made, we won't know exactly which programs are included in the Dems Build Back Better Act. But now we do have that new timeline of October 18th, by which if they're linking debt ceiling and Build Back Better, will need to make those decisions and then pass Build Back Better.
Okay, so October 18th is kind of a big marker for that human infrastructure piece, the Builds Back Better. And as we know, that's inextricably linked to the hard infrastructure bill, because of course we need to ensure access to those jobs for folks who've been most impacted by the pandemic. So let's talk about that hard infrastructure bill. What's happening with that?
So that bill is the bill that passed on a bipartisan basis through the Senate and is now in the House. Up until this week, House Dem leadership was intending to move forward on both the vote on the hard infrastructure deal and the reconciliation bill together in order to address moderates' concern of needing to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure deal while still recognizing progressives' push for a much higher and larger Build Back Better package. At this point, it seems like those two processes have been delinked because of the conversation that we had about the debt ceiling. And the House is teed up to potentially have a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure deal as soon as Thursday. Right now, we're recording on Wednesday. It's not certain whether Speaker Pelosi has the votes in order to move that bill through the House and actually pass that package. And it's pretty unlikely that we'll see an actual passage of that bill as soon as this week, but they are trying to move that forward now on its own path.
Got it. Okay, so back on the human infrastructure piece of this, Builds Back Better, it sounds like in the course of the package negotiations, once they settle on the final number, there's probably going to be reductions across the board, including in workforce funding. I know in Washington, we've been hearing some murmurs that America's College Promise, the community college proposal, and workforce funding could be pitted against each other as duplicative. But we, of course, know that's a false narrative. Can you talk about why that is?
Absolutely. So if we really want an inclusive economic recovery, we need to keep all pathways open to workers who have been most impacted by the pandemic. Pathways that include both programs at community colleges and those with community-based organizations funded through the workforce system. It's not just that these programs aren't duplicative. The investments that are proposed in workforce and the investments that are proposed for America's College Promise and Free Community College are necessarily complementary to each other. So first, the two proposals and two sets of investments will serve different workers who are on for different types of jobs or at different parts of their education and careers. There's also investments that are in this workforce bucket, like grants to support industry partnerships, that will enable states and institutions to more effectively implement the proposals that we see as part of America's College Promise. So these two, as folks listening and many of those in our network understand, it's not only that these two aren't duplicative, it's that they're necessary together in order to complement and reach the broadest set of workers necessary.
Right. And of course, like all the other things we've talked about today, two more things that are inextricably linked. So we're going to talk more about the America's College Promise proposal on our next episode. But in the meantime, Katie, thanks so much for all the updates.